What is up, homebrewed Christianity listeners? This is Trip, so prepare yourself. Buckle your theological safety belt. Yeah, because in this deacons meeting, you're going to get to meet like one of my favorite human beings who's an above-average scholar, could beat me up, but he could only beat me up after he moved away from me because that's when he got ripped and started wrestling. He lives in one of those states you fly over, but he enjoys it, even though he grew up on the West Coast in Seattle and then came to Los Angeles. So he hates culture, but he loves Jesus. Eric Hall. What's up, Eric?
How you doing, man?
Good. I was like, whoa, I'm going to get to talk to Eric. So the best part about I'm sad Tony's sick, but
yeah, me too.
I'm not sad.
Hates culture, but loves Jesus. Can I take that as a personal motto? You just created a personal motto. It's beautiful.
Well, but you love culture as Jesus loves culture. All right.
Right.
So first off, tell us like tell us where you are. There's a brick behind you. So.
I'm in my family room right now. You can see the unfolded laundry chilling there because we've got a 2-year-old. And I'm sitting here ready to talk about some awesome things, including, but not merely including Jesus.
But first off, you need to tell everyone what school you're at, and you're my first friend that I went to school with an endowed chair.
So I'm at Carroll College. It's the diocesan college in Helena, Montana. And people fly over this state until they go to Yellowstone because we claim Yellowstone as our own just as much as Wyoming does. This was an awesome move for our family. My dad's from Miles City, Montana, so I spent a lot of time here growing up. And I finally got to pretend to be a Montanan once we actually moved here, which is kind of cool. Because
how do you pretend to be a Montanan?
You wrestle too much. You pretend like you're farming by gardening.
Hey, look, your neighbor grew chickens in Los Angeles.
That's true.
Well, raised chickens.
I like growing chickens better. Yeah. And our neighbor's growing chickens right now too. And a raven I didn't know this. Ravens eat chickens. It just broke in and ate some chickens.
Well, we have coyotes here. Urban coyotes. Those things are vicious.
I know. We didn't let our cats out there and we don't let them out here.
Well, there you go. So, and the other thing is, well, we're jumping in, because sometimes when you have longer talks, if people are bored or only listening halfway through, they quit. And honestly, I know how boring you're going to be. So why don't you tell them right now about you got a grant because you apparently love the environment and teenagers. So give that invitation.
Yeah, this is crazy. We actually won 2 grants.
And we's what Catholics mean by the institution.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
It's just a we.
We just take away the I and we make it all a we. We won 2 grants in the theology department. One's for this high school camp that reflects on Pope Francis's Laudato Si. So what we do, I like to say, we overcome the gaps between praying, playing, and thinking. And we do that by spending time down at Yellowstone and on the Carroll College campus, which is surrounded by these awesome hiking trails and mountain biking trails. So we get out in nature, learn the science of how the environment works, and reflect on what it means to be a creature in God's creation in this camp. And this is for high schoolers, basically 10th grade through 12th grade. And then we won this other grant to pay our theology interns to go out and work with youth ministries, with nonprofits such as food banks, etc., and do these theological reflections on them at the end of the year. You see, our theology majors, we ask them all to do a double major because we see theology as what we'd call an integrative degree, namely, theology is an end in itself. It's supposed to inform the way that you live the rest of your life. So you get to pursue it for these awesome reasons, but then you bring it into whatever you do. So we're trying to make these awesome disciples of Christ at our school, and Murdoch Trust is helping to fund that.
That's awesome. So the last thing is you're going to send me links and junk so that I can post for people that have teenagers that like Jesus and the planet.
Oh, I did send you links. I'll send them again.
I'm just saying it out loud right now so that people listening go, oh, if I go to the webpage where this is posted, there'll be links to this. It was telegraphing.
That's true. No, I see.
You're not a video podcasting theological professional.
No, I'm really not. And
no.
I will warn you now that neither am I a web design professional. And we are hiring someone to do this web designing for us the next year. They're bad. They're bad.
Well, I just want you to know I just re-upped your ownership of ericcehall.com.
I need to.
You still own the URL. Well, I guess I own it, but it's still there. All right, so we're going to talk about humility and God talk. And here's the reason that I'm excited about this is because I have a feeling that we'll have some significant agreement some places and some significant disagreement. I feel like I should give a theological trigger warning that up front, Eric and I are very, very good friends. Like I called him on the worst day of my life and send him pictures right after a baby born type of friend. So we may engage in hyperbolic, which is an intense hyperbole.
Yep.
Just to prove points and or be entertaining or just try to win an argument with each other for entertainment / educational purposes. So I just wanted to say that because if it appears by the end like taunting WWF wrestlers, then that's okay. Also, for those that are looking at the video, I just want you to know who I keep by my desk. There are pictures of philosophers and theologians around my office, but the only signed portrait is of the one and only Ric Flair. Woo!
I love it. You got a signed portrait.
I'm from North Carolina, son.
I know, man. I'm jealous.
All right, so first off, we're going to talk about humility and God talk. You need to explain to me, Eric, how when I met you, before I witnessed to you, and you became a real Christian, you were a Platonist, like a real freaking Platonist.
I think I've gone back. I've become a Jesus Platonist again.
Look.
I know.
So before we jump in, you need to explain to people the giant theological moving target of Platonists, Jesus-flavored Platonists. I'm so freaking Protestant, half of Protestants aren't Protestants. Hermeneutical type, followed by endowed Catholic chair. Apparently Jesus Platonist again. And I may be venting because I'm trying to write jokes in the middle of your book for my series. That I don't want to treat you personally in it. But,
no, you should. I'll laugh hysterically at all of them.
All right, Mr. Miyagi. So, go ahead. Before you jump in, just give a brief biographical sketch of your personality disorder in the theological arena.
Yeah, no, it's been a wild ride for me. Because when I go in, I go all in with any of these positions. And I've laid out all the positions in this book that I bought into at one point in my life. And I can pretty definitively say that I've settled at this point because I just don't know how you get beyond some of the critiques that through what I call Miyagi God in this book, this classical sense of God being the ordering point, the stability point of the universe. I don't know how you get beyond this particular point. So what I did was when I became a Christian Platonist, this was a freeing move for me. In fact, I wasn't even Christian when I was first a Platonist, right?
I know. But first,
of itself, yeah.
Explain what a freaking Platonist is doing in 2014 or whatever year it was.
Here's the way that I was a Platonist. Drop all the stuff that you think you know about Plato and focus on the center of what Plato is. What's Plato really after? truth over anything and everything else. And he's willing to give up his identity, as Socrates commands him to do, for the sake of the truth. So he pursues truth over and above what someone like Harry G. Frankfurt, a Princeton philosopher, calls bullshit. Something that the ancient sophists, what they claim to be knowledge, what our current politicians claim to be, more or less. He was seeking a way beyond bullshit to the truth. And that grabbed me. And sort of this erotic love for the truth in Plato drew me in. And really what it was this freeing point for me from a sort of fundamentalist past, where I had this flashlight in a dark room that I could use to begin smelling out and ferreting out some sort of smelly dead animal in it, right? That's what Platonism was for me at first. I then made this jump into radical hermeneutic thought. I just had to see what was there, right? I mean, everyone claims to know Calvin and Luther, and I wanted to see what the real consequences of Calvin and Luther were. So I jumped into this during grad school to see what was going on. It offered some answers, including the capacity of God to suffer with us, right? And that really drew me in. But it ultimately fails, I think, because that's right. Oh my gosh, this is my doctor father, and a good friend and someone whom I greatly, greatly respect. That's an awesome book.
For those that are listening to the podcast, I was holding up Ingolf Dalfert's Crucified and Resurrected, Reconstructing the Grammar of Christology. Iggy D, as I personally like to call him,
yep,
not to his face, was your advisor and
yep.
on my committee. So it'd be after I passed that I tell him it's Iggy D. But, this November, there were 2 amazing Christologies that came out, and the second best one was this one. And that's like after mine.
That's true. That's a good point. That's a good point, man. So I jumped fully into this hermeneutic thought. I got into Wittgenstein. I figured out what it means to talk about the emergence of and the importance of language. I did a dissertation halfway on Heidegger. I should say a third of the way on Heidegger, a third of the way on Charles Taylor, not the Liberian dictator, but the Canadian philosopher. And
the secular age.
Yeah, the secular age. And I tried to round it out with some with the last third on Eberhard Jungel. But in all honesty, once I finished that dissertation, I came back to the position that I started with some awesome insights. You can't get rid of Socrates and what Socrates and Plato are trying to do, namely understanding the God who stands at the end of our pursuit of the truth and our constant fascination, desire, erotic desire for it. So there's where I stand. So what's it mean to be a Jesus-flavored Platonist? It means essentially to say that you affirm something like the philosopher's God, and that this philosopher's God only comes to have meaning for us once you see who this God is for us, what the will of God is for us in and through Christ, the one who loves us, the one who has mercy.
So if people are hearing this, and now one of the perfect things about Claremont as a PhD program is that theologians, philosophers, and general scholars of religion are all educated together, which means that you, regardless of where you end up, have the internal monologue of a right-wing Greek Orthodox person, a post-structuralist queer theorist who grew up a Lutheran, is now Jain, and a Methodist.
You forgot to add Pentecostal to the last one.
Yeah, and Pentecostal, and like a future Methodist minister who's really smart and is looking forward to preaching the lectionary to 12 old people with glee. So, like, and everything in between. So the one of the things that when we start to talk about God, especially, I'm just like already having to rub off all the crustaceans of that Romanish speak you're doing.
And then you're reading.
I mean, they may be thinking right now, has Eric ever realized that he's a privileged white male in the West inheriting Christendom, using the logic of the one to oppress the masses and the many, and he's working for an institution that, until the new pope, who we know secretly is a secular humanist, doesn't love the poor on the planet, or some other things that, like, like Foucault and Nietzsche and friends would want to say, like, to convince me that you have some clue how crazy you sound to an educated person before proceeding on this mumbo jumbo thing.
Yeah. So the truth is, we can use any position for the sake of repressing someone. That's why I say, like, the desire for repression, it's a disease of the will and not necessarily of the intellect. And it might be that too.
No, I think that's important. But where has that oppression via the will shown up most frequently?
Oh, hey, I'm with you there. With the people with guns. And Montana has lots of guns.
Well, not everyone has birds of prey like ravens taking out their critters.
That's right. You got to watch the ravens.
Look, I personally am. If gun owning in a situation where there are animals that have you in their food chain around.
Oh, there are. There are bears.
I know, that's what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, and we butt up.
You can't hippy dippy a gun owner if they can run into a bear. Well, I guess you could, but that's one I don't quite understand.
No, you can't. Yeah, we live up against BLM land right now. So I expect to see Cliven Bundy and his crew out there at some point. But we got cougar out behind us, and we got a big dog helping to protect us, and I'm the other big dog trying to help protect us.
Oh man, there are 3 things I thought of saying I didn't, but
yeah, you did.
So tell me, you introduced these types of things to undergrad students. I'm sure they had a critical literary theory class or something when they start wanting to know about your confidence. And they're the ones that are going to be like, you don't even have any postmodern humility here, Eric.
No, that's true. I don't buy postmodern humility. I don't, but there's this claim in postmodernity not to know anything, right? We can't, it's all this sort of perspectivism, and I get it. I mean, I've been there before. I've gone there, but at the end of the day, you're always affirming something as correct. And I think, you know what I'm saying? Like, if I say that all knowledge is merely a matter of perspective, or all knowledge is merely relative to me and my particular position in the world, that's affirming a piece of the pie of the truth that we exist in. But you're still affirming a truth of some sort, right? And what you end up doing is you blow that piece of pie up into the whole truth, and you then take this seemingly humble claim and become the most ostentatious of all people, who claims to know that all things are merely perspectival and we cannot actually have any certitude, if you will. I don't know if that's the right term to use. I don't like Descartes that much.
Well, what if you just like adding dash-ish onto things? Like, all things are perspectival-ish.
Oh, yeah, that's great. That's cool. I'm fine with add ish onto everything, because that's true, I think, so long as you're willing to admit it's true, right? I mean, I can't grasp the world but through the lenses. Truth-ish? Yeah, truth-ish is harder. I can't go there with you. It's not truthy. I'm not giving you truthy like Colbert. We're not talking politics here. We're talking philosophy now.
No. You know what you need? You need some apophaticism.
What will apophaticism do for me, Trip?
Apophaticism? Every real theologian who's genuinely a Christian knows that Pseudo-Dionysius, who couldn't put his name on the work, didn't put it on there because he didn't know how to spell his name. He didn't put it on there because he knows the moment you attach a name to something, power stands in for it. And so if you're going to use the word God, you got to negate it all. You know what I'm talking about?
I do know you're talking.
PoMo, hashtag post-struck, hashtag so freaking theo-poetically awesome you can't handle it, hashtag I don't hate peoples or the planet or the poor, but you do, hashtag PoMo critiquey of you-ish. I don't want to
I don't want to
say it confidently because that would be anti-apophatic.
Exactly.
Apophaticism is mystical and Catholic. You obviously know this.
I know, and I know that no Catholic mystics ever served Eucharist to people right after they got done having some sort of vision. I know that never happened. I know they didn't really believe. They had this sort of wink and nod to everything that they said, just like we tend to today when we invoke this name of apophaticism, right? They're
I'm
like,
glad you
oh,
agree.
no. God is love. God is love. Right?
Well, look, if you're trying to convince me the Pseudo-Dionysius, Nicholas of Cusa, Meister Eckhart may have been like practicing Catholics, but Meister Eckhart may have preached daily sermons, done confession in regular Eucharist with nuns in Germany for a long period of time, but deep down, he was obsessed with the non-deconstructible, we know not whence it comes. And obviously we agree, because why? Here's the thing. I think it might be part of your Platonist oppressive stuff.
Yep.
Why would you take what someone does every day while taking up a vow of poverty and chastity as the way to interpret what they're saying and doing and writing versus Derrida and Deleuze? Answer the question.
I lost the question because I was so entertained by you for a minute.
Well,
you must have just got done reading chapter 4. You're adding comment in there right now, aren't you? We're talking mysticism here, and I have a great deal of respect for mystics, but not for the same reason that I'd say the sort of post-structuralist crowd has respect for mystics. Post-structuralist crowd, I'm greatly overgeneralizing here, and you can see where even in saying that, I have a sensitivity to post-structuralism, Wittgensteinianism, etc. But I think they think that Meister Eckhart says all these things, again, with a wink and a nod. Like, he doesn't mean what he's saying. But we got to take a deep look at Meister Eckhart, what he actually believes, the vocabulary that he's actually using. This isn't some transcendent vocabulary that Meister Eckhart is pulling from the nether as he sips on some sort of mushroom-infused beer. Right? This is a traditional vocabulary that he's using. He's using the vocabulary of grace. God takes Meister Eckhart up into God's self, right? And this is not an act on Meister Eckhart's part. That's grace in the traditional sense of the term. And he, and one of the ideas that's often been lost in today's talk of theology is this notion of divine incomprehensibility. This is getting as Catholic as you can get right now, right? Divine incomprehensibility means this: God is not actually incomprehensible. God is the most knowable, most given over to the light of intellect. I don't want to say being, that's not right. Act of existence that we could have. It's just that God's infinite and we're finite, and so God is incomprehensible to us. Incomprehensibility is a description of our relationship to God, such that we cannot know through our finite intellect that which is infinite. And this is what Meister Eckhart and the rest of the mystics are taking up. They're saying, we've had these experiences of God. We have this experience of God's incomprehensibility, that God is so intelligible that we cannot put it necessarily into perfect words.
Look, I just have this feeling here, Eric, that
Am I oppressing?
That you're trying to convince me that when we talk about the incomprehensibility of God, that we're talking about my own human deficiencies and not the lack of reality of God.
That's exactly right, Trip. I am saying that we humans, born of a particular place and time, under certain parents who may be good or crappy, or like most of us, somewhere in between, we could be born under Jim Crow, we could be born under Obama. But yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, is that we are indeed finite creatures given over to the milieus in which we exist, and to the truth nonetheless in which we exist.
All right, so here's the thing. This is, I'm gonna step out of just harassing you for a second.
Please.
This is Trip pitching it to you because I'm a constructive postmodernist that reads a lot of Whitehead. So I'm not a hater on Deleuze because he knew who to footnote, but I I I sometimes drug text Jack Caputo, so you can like.
I love it.
Now I will say that after reading chapter 4 of your book, he may be more Catholic than he think he is, but I came up with this after reading your email about what you wanted to talk about when you canceled How to Be a Christian Existentialist, and the people are probably still mad about this.
I know. I'm sorry.
Nonetheless, here's the question. I came up with 2 different postmodern stances, or you could call them PoMo stances.
I like it.
And these are ones that if they had to write 4 chapters in their dissertation before they said one declarative sentence, and you only get one unless you're
only one per dissertation.
You only get one declarative statement.
The rest are qualifications.
You get 2 declarative statements if you're a constructive postmodernist. But here are the postmodern stances that I come up with, and I don't even know if you fit in either one, but I'm interested. One, when you're dealing with religion, PoMo religion and such, and you don't want to be a loser who hasn't read nothing and use their brain, which I know theoretically you don't.
No.
We'll see. Judith Butler's praying for you. Number one option is that you defend the inference of religion and then you deflate the content.
Sure. So
you're like, here, you want to know what truth is? Let me describe the form of the event of truth.
Sure.
And there's a form-content distinction, which is helpful because you know what the content's good for?
Nothing?
The same thing war's good for.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, but I'm postmodern. I can't say absolute or nothing, so I'm glad you...
Somewhere in between.
Yeah, I knew you would go with that. I planned the absolute or nothing line.
I love it.
Every nerd that hears this appreciates it, and no one that isn't knows not why they find that maybe not humorous.
Can we say a modicum of becoming instead of absolutely nothing?
All right. So, nonetheless, you defend the inference of religion, but you weaken the content. That's one. The second option is that you faithfully and critically preserve the content, but weaken the claim. So you take the content of the religion and then talk the postmodern thing is to transform the authority or shape or finality or certitude of the claim.
So the first one, what you're doing is you're saying, here's the form of, it's sort of Wittgensteinian is what you're saying. This is the form of religious life. We can engage in it, but we don't necessarily, and it brings great community together. It makes us one, loving, that kind of stuff, right? But it doesn't necessarily have any truth content behind its claims. That's number one. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
You wrote an article complaining about the first.
I did write an article complaining about the first. I wrote an article about the good Jack Caputo, whom I will say I have a deep, deep respect for. I just also deeply disagree with him.
Actually, I'll say one of the ways to judge a scholar is if the article ends by telling the person they wrote the whole article on, they think they're full of it, is an description of the person they actually agree with. And this is true about tweets, Facebook posts, book reviews on Amazon, or anything. If you're postmodern and don't take long enough to actually understand the person you're about to tell that you think they're full of it, then you're not even postmodern. Only Descartes and Company could do that.
Oh, only Descartes. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's true. Only Descartes and Company could do that. Well, I think where this position goes wrong is it tries to envision itself like the act of deconstruction is somehow being in and of itself transcendent and not given over to the culture into which it's been inculcated, right? I mean, I think that's the ultimate wrong-headed claim here. So it tries to reject tradition, but in rejecting tradition, it naively assumes tradition. And a naive assumption of tradition just forces us to repeat tradition over again. Now, you're talking to a Catholic here. I think tradition is ultimately a good thing. It gives us not a bias, but a lens through which we can see the truth, right? It brings bias too, part of our finitude, but it ultimately has a benign stance in that we can, it gives us a lens in which we can see the truth. But yeah, I think when we get rid of tradition naively, and that's what a lot of the Enlightenment does, and postmodernity to me is really just a fulcrum of the Enlightenment in that regard. It tries to move beyond tradition without moving through tradition. So like I talk about in this book, you become a bourbon that hasn't been aged long enough in the bourbon barrel of tradition. And you don't have that intensity to you, that right flavor that would allow you to actually see what tradition is, where it goes right, where it goes wrong, with the recognition that you, whether you like it or not, are always already bound up with tradition. There's my answer to number one. Number two, let's talk number two for a second again. So I'm trying to, who do you have in mind here? So it's, you espouse the form. No, on this one, you espouse the content.
You preserve the content and you weaken the claim. So
are you thinking hermeneutic?
No, I'm thinking, I mean, there's a number of options. So philosophically, what the claim is determined by your philosophical school of thought. So
I see.
Let's say if you're Pannenberg, you've weakened the claim. How? By saying it's verifiable at the eschaton. If you're Boltzmann, you've weakened the claim by saying truth is an event that gives you a new self.
Sure.
If you're like Philip Clayton, who both of us are friends with, like he does it in a much more fluid way where he weakens the claim depending on the doctrine. So if he's like the existence of an ultimate reality, he's like, you should read your science journal and not be an idiot. If he's like, God was revealed in a homeless dead Jew, he's like, that's my intuition and it's freaking awesome, but you may as well not make your neighbor have to think that. And halfway or 1/3 of the way through his book, Predicament of Belief, like he's like, I'm not talking in metaphysical terms at this point.
Yeah.
Someone like Schubert Ogden says that metaphysically, you argue for the plausibility of ultimate reality with intentional revelatory activity, and existentially, you deal with the content of the tradition. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways, but
I see what you're getting at. Yeah. So the basically the philosophy theology distinction, right?
That there's some traction to your religious language connected to an ultimate. Like when you said earlier that the God of the philosophers is connected to the God of religion, I thought of Paul Tillich's book on biblical religion and the search of ultimate reality. He's arguing the same argument here, I think, where
likely so.
Where you're weakening the claim, but you're Schellingian it, Schelling style, but you're preserving the content because there is no new being without the instance of it. Or
you're probably. I mean, I probably take a similar approach in this sense now, with the caveat that. Well, I don't know if there's a caveat. I just don't think you can argue anyone into a Christian understanding of God, right? This is a function of the beauty of the gospel and what Christ stands for. The influx of peace that doesn't defeat war with war, but in and through peace somehow, right? That's the beauty of the God. So I think I do give myself over to this, but I'd add a strong point to it where I want to distinguish myself from some of these ways of talking about it. I affirm the philosopher's God. I'm not going to affirm it by way of and through science. I'll have a much more angering argument in this book for the existence of God. But at the end of the day, I think my point is, who cares? I mean, in all honesty, right? Except for a couple intellectuals in the world, who cares about the philosopher's God? So it draws us into a desire for and a pursuit of the truth. That's great if you got the time to do that. But most of the world is just trying to get
a lot of student loans about that.
I did. That's right. I know. So for me, it's now become not just a leisure activity, but a way of paying off those student loans, right?
But if you were to describe what humility looks like for God Talk, for someone to say that the specialty of their vocation is an elective and not a required class is pretty close. And I mean, this is one of the conversations Phil and I have argued quite a bit about.
Yeah.
My thought. Now, I don't want to speak for him, so he has whatever feelings he may or may not have about this, because I know they've changed over time. But my thought is that if your vocation for the church is as a theologian, and I just realized what I'm about to say sounds way too Catholic, so this is making me awkward.
I like it. Keep going.
If your vocation is as a theologian, where your call to faithfulness is not to the world in and of itself, but to the integrity and well-being of the Christian community,
Yep.
then part of that vocation is critical and faithful articulation of
That's
the
right.
foundational claims. That
Yep.
does not mean that there's any preferential option for someone who affirms, denies, understands, or doesn't understand any damn thing you say philosophically about the God of the philosophers or any of that.
Well,
Vocationally, you're committed to articulating the plausible rationality of a transcendent other who is invested in creation in a way that God could testify to God's self and it be heard and received. Apart from that, the rest of the stuff you do is on a much more communal, existential, historical, social line. And in that sense, I have a lot of atheist friends who are like, I actually don't even believe in God at all, but if I was going to believe in one, and it was revealed in a dude who was badass like Jesus and forgave the people that jailed him on the cross,
yeah.
that should be true. And to me, like, I had a point in my own life where the only reason I was Christian was like, I was so PoMo. Like, I was like, well, all these other things theologians are concerned about are stupid. I just think that if anything's going to be true, even if it's an arbitrary selection of a proto-meta-narrative for the well-being of organizing meaning, purpose, and value for myself, even though those are delusions of people struggling with their finitude,
That's right.
I'm going to pick the homeless dead Jew who thought everyone mattered and forgave the people that killed him.
And for God's sake, wanted to get rid of violence, who refused, like God in the Noah narrative, to fight violence and corruption with violence and corruption, right? But came in weakness, and this loving weakness somehow that I don't think we can emulate, if I'm honest.
No, and isn't its awesomeness partially due to our inability to emulate it?
Yeah, I would think so.
The fact that you and I conclude our books with the exact same ideas, and I know you're almost as horrible a human being as me.
Yeah, almost.
And that I've met people who don't think I'm the worst person they know, and you have too. That makes me more optimistic on what is beneath the surface of our ontological screwed upness.
I think so. And, I mean, yeah, a big part of it is the beauty of the call of the gospel, right? The beauty of the gospel, that it upsets the world. I mean, let's contrast in some ways the Enuma Elish with the Hebrew biblical accounts, right? Because the Enuma Elish,
there's nothing better to do than talk
there's
about
nothing better to do. But I make my freshmen do this every semester, and the reason is because I think the Gospels themselves depend so heavily on these creation accounts as contrasted with the Enuma Elish. Now, I don't think that was intentionally going through anyone's mind. I just think it was implied. And the Enuma Elish is this Babylonian creation narrative where gods slay gods. The world is built on the basically beheaded god of another body, and humans are nothing but the enslaved beings of some divine being sent to do menial tasks. It assumes at its base that violence is at the core of this world, that violence should be at the core of this world, and that we must subjugate one another in and through violence, and we can only gain peace that is ordered in and by violence, the Pax Romana, if you will. And the biblical creation accounts, they give us a totally different vision of what it means to be a part of creation. Namely, everything was ordered at the beginning, right? And God breathed God's self into the very dust of this earth in order to create life. Peace reigns, not violence. Violence is only introduced into this creation by way of some sort of celestial or human act of some sort, right? So the gospel to me stands for this utterly upsetting view that says violence was not supposed to be here. This draw of violence into the nothingness to which all violence brings us, right, wasn't the way things were supposed to be. And that's what Christ counters throughout his entire ministry: healing, bringing people back into community, curing them of the ailments that draw them into nothingness, right? And it's this beauty of the gospel that I think draws me to it. And maybe I'm a little bit like those atheistic folks that say, yeah, if I'm going to believe something, this is it. At the end of the day, I just can't help it. I kind of say always with Luther, here I stand, I can do no other. I'm kind of a slave to the gospel, whether I want to be or not.
I mean, Iggy D's very glad you lapsed back into your Lutheranism there.
Yes.
But you sent this in an email, and again, at least performatively, I'm significantly concerned.
Oh, yeah, please. I want to hear this. What did I write?
You said that when we reject the ability to talk about God at all, but you kept talking, and take that talk seriously. And I'm thinking, excellent, comma, why, not a period. We implicitly claim to know what God is so well that we know none of our God talk fits.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, this is my major critique with most apophaticism today. What apophaticism today is really claiming is to know what God is so well and so thoroughly so as to claim that we cannot talk about God at all. That's a huge claim in my book. To know the essence and existence of God.
That's what I'm talking about. The essence and existence of God. I feel like as a theologian, your job is to make sure no one says anything about it.
To just keep him from saying things. I don't want any constitutive claims about God.
Yes.
It keeps us safer? Is that what it does?
I'm just saying that, like, you say things in a strong enough way. Those of us that try to have a diverse group of philosophical friends can imagine people getting disturbed. And when you say that we claim to know what God is so well that we know none of our God talk fits, like there's a surface level thing where like, duh, right? Like, okay, no, God, but I think underneath it is there's this little.
I'm needling.
Yeah, but I wonder if this is the issue. And my intuition when I hear it is that some forms of critique of truth, right, or about the conclusions. So you're like, well, God is love, life, liberty, the American dream.
The pursuit of happiness.
Pursuit of happiness and or property, depending on who your editor is.
Yep.
But and so those conclusions are things you can contest, and the humans can go, well, excuse me, sir, I did a socio-biological reading of this, and this is the truth. And then like you start having fights about the conclusions.
Sure.
But I think the postmodern critique is to recognize that the problem with truth isn't the conclusion, but the origin or the very person who's trying to speak truth. And like, if you start talking, especially Eric, as a Catholic married man with a child in Montana, flyover,
and another on the way.
Huh?
And another on the way.
And another on the way. Praise be God's name. But if that's your situation, then I don't know. Like, I feel like to implicitly claim to know what God is basically to tell everyone else they're wrong.
Well, I think that's the problem, right? Like when we cut off God talk, that's actually what we're doing. Is we're already making this claim that we know so well what God is that we can't talk about it. So it becomes this power move that cuts off all ability and willingness to talk about God, whatever your background might be, right? That we just simply, we become obscurantists is what I'd call it. Namely, we say certain questions are off limits, and the question of what God is therefore becomes off limits. That's just politically correct bullshit in some ways. It's just it's just trying to cut off a conversation before we can ever have it.
Well, look, I know that you and I both read God, the Mystery of the World together, and I have a new catchy way of trying to make Jungel's point, which it has not been approved by the Iggy, so I can't confirm nor deny it's accurate. But Jungel talks about how, like, prior to really these raisings of questions about the nature of God and character of God,
Yep.
you would have battles over God is insert the essence.
That's
right?
right.
God is
Yeah.
love. I don't know. What about this? Or
God becomes just this black box into which you can project anything you want, right?
Yeah. So you have this question around the essence of God. Then after the Holocaust, after all these kind of tragedies of the 20th centuries,
Yeah.
the questions around the essence of God get intensified to the existence of God. So
Yeah.
you just cut God is question mark. God is to the existence. So it goes from essence to existence.
That's right.
But I think that the postmodern thing is like one more step. And people confuse those who are in confessional traditions who think the question of theodicy doesn't dignify an answer because of the bloody bench of human history with those who don't think God's worth speaking. And so they, instead of God is love, maybe, or God is, I don't know, they say God.
Yeah, no, I look, this is the real critique, isn't it? This is the real critique. Who cares? After the Holocaust, after the Armenian genocide, after the Native American genocide, right? Who cares? I think that's that's about the only real critique of any of this stuff that I take seriously. Why would you care about the essence or existence of God if this God does indeed allow millions upon millions of people to to die in horrific ways, right? I draw out this picture of this God in my book, where I was reading The Rape of Nanking, which if you want to be happy, don't read it. If you want to see the reality and violence of the world in which we live, do read it. And basically, there's this pile of Chinese heads, just a pile of heads, stacked neatly, actually. And the Japanese soldiers were cutting those heads off as sport, right? Now, we have to have some historical sympathy when we look at those Japanese soldiers going, yeah, I probably have that capacity within myself to be one of those who was cutting off heads, right? But that aside, when we look at that, we go, yeah, who cares about this intellectualist understanding of God amidst the suffering of the world? And this is where, again, the beauty of the gospel emerges for me. If God's to matter to us in any sort of way whatsoever, it has to be something to me through someone like Christ, where God not only comes to us, not only promises a restoration, a recapitulation, that ancient Orthodox and Catholic term of the world into what it was always supposed to have been, but suffers with us and not merely exists at some distance, right?
One of the things about that intrigues me is where does the question mark go?
Yeah.
Right. So like God is love, question mark. And that's about the essence of God. God is, question mark, is about the existence.
Mm-hmm.
I think our contemporary condition doesn't give things a question mark. They just are like God-ish.
That's right. Yeah. And is once you lose that question mark, you actually lose any capacity to talk about God whatsoever.
Well, but the thing, I think, like Charles Taylor in your dissertation, which I've read recently because I value our relationship, and it points out is that this secularization thesis doesn't actually have an eschaton to it, and that the God-ish question given our cultural and technological reformulations, it insists on being asked. And the fear, I think, of people who are scared of content being attached to the God question, is that God-ish, and then you see this explosion of cultural wrestling with the very same questions the first humanoids around a campfire asked. Is it actually testifies to an anthropological conclusion, namely that human beings don't know what the hell to do if they aren't Goddish. They may not believe in God or the market or the state or their family or any other meta-narrative which is clearly oppressive and kills the planet and the poor, but we don't know how to exist without being Goddish. In your religion, faith, or whatever can be directed towards all sorts of things. But the fear, like this is Tripp stating something you talk about in the second third of your dissertation, back to you with hyperbole and hopes to provoke a response, is that human beings don't know how not to be thrown into a series of questions that demand answers that their historicity and thrownness are not accidental to.
And that they can't reveal fully.
Constitutively connected to, because finitude in contrast to the infinite is its constitutive relationship, which is necessarily oppressive if you're a good post-structuralist.
I mean, I think this is what the issue becomes, right? Is that a lot of post-structuralists, especially a lot of Christian post-structuralists, at least the ones I know, what they're really concerned about is not being fundamentalist anymore. They don't want to be assholes.
Well, they're trying to avoid options that existed for intelligent people in the 17th century.
Fair enough, yeah. And I think that's right. I'm just not sure that post-structuralism, while it creates the critical distance through which we can see other possibilities, it doesn't offer an answer unto itself, because it just takes the questions off the table, right? Questions that we can't get rid of. The reason that I say, here I am, I can do no other. Here I stand, I can do no other, right? The questions don't go away. We can just ignore them like a festering wound pussing up beneath the soggy morning sun. I don't know if a sun's ever soggy, by the way. I was thinking in a marsh.
A soggy morning?
Soggy morning, yeah. Soggy morning, marshy sun. Does that work?
Whatever you want, dude. Whatever.
We'll take it. I think that's the real issue here, and I think that's I think that's a good thing to find distance from. That's what Platonism did for me. I think I followed these questions out to their fullness, or at least I still am. And I said, yeah, I can't ignore that I actually say things about God in the process of denying what I say, that I say anything about God.
Well, okay. I get that around your Platonic fire, as Platonic rhymes with satanic.
It rhymes with satanic. I like what you did there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Santa?
Mm-hmm.
Is that Santa?
Mm. You know what the X in Christmas stands for?
I don't.
It's a prefiguration of the cross. Because those Eastern Christians think the incarnation saves.
Theosis, baby. I love theosis so much.
Anyway, that was a joke. Look, you told me that Christians have an especially difficult point. And then I said to myself, I'm going to guess that his difficult point I find impossible. And then I read this. We claim Christ is the Logos, and that, as such, all talk is mediated by him. I
made you mad, huh?
I then got concerned and realized that between the previous point and this one, you had started smoking weed. And that you got high. And then in Montana, where you can have large amounts of guns with extended clips,
yep,
locked in safes, but you can't have marijuana, you got high. And then decide to shoot someone, namely everyone.
All of it.
Yeah. As Christians, this is like holy war epistemology, right?
There
When
might
we
be
claim that Christ is the Logos and all talk is mediated by him, that's holy war epistemology.
Yeah, maybe so.
Woo!
Woo!
I just showed it was a joke because the
Ric
four
Flair.
horsemen of
Ric
the
Flair.
apocalypse in wrestling mythology includes Ric Flair, but I'm just saying that was an aside for the three people. You know, there may be 50,000 people listening to the Homebrewed podcast, but three of them would have connected the inversion of my comment by a Ric Flair woo. And for those people, and the fact that someone watching this is already, dang, Ric Flair on NWO, New World Order, New World Order.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the NWO splits between white and red. Are you
Man.
Wolfpack? With the big.
That's when I lost track. I have to admit.
Are you going to Hogan style it?
Oh man.
And
yeah.
leftists are now concerned that Hogan has become the emblem of sticking it to the system.
That's right. Gawker.
Yes. Yeah, by sticking it to Gawker. And they're like, this is great. But then a billionaire is covering Gawker. They're like, pissed. But then they're like, it's a billionaire who is pissed because they made him out publicly about his sexuality before he wanted to. So then they rejoin. Who knows what's happening next? This is the beginning of a WrestleMania plot line.
The essentialisms are breaking down, is what you're saying.
Nonetheless, you told me that we claim Christ as the Logos and that all talk is media by him, and I've already felt oppressed. And I don't even know why.
I know, I'm sorry.
It's my allergy and or enlightenment.
Here's where the incomprehensibility becomes handy. I'm not saying everyone has to agree with me, right? I'm just saying, once again, I am drawn into the beauty of the gospel. And when I'm drawn into the beauty of the gospel, I am saying that what I know of God is ultimately mediated in, by, and through Christ. Otherwise, it just doesn't matter one way or another. If you lose Christ, you lose any sense of the meaningfulness of our existence and what it means to be called to a good eschaton. If you lose God, you lose all the capacity to be drawn unto that, right? So what I'm saying here is, from the Christian standpoint, yeah, ultimately your talk becomes mediated by Christ when you talk about God. And we ultimately claim with John, I think, that God is love, which he defines as service to one's brother and sister, service to the poor, and ultimately a willingness to take up a cross, which he thinks is sort of an extended continuum in the line.
So one of the things I think that will be perplexing, confusing, or problematic, depending on who you are, is how many Protestants, mostly evangelicals, have taken the Logos Christology of the early church and isolated it from the Platonic vision of the interpenetrating relations of beauty, truth, and goodness.
Sure, that's right.
So, like, when I hear that, I think to myself, Christ is the Logos, and all talk is mediated by him. That's a definitional statement if you're a Platonist.
Yeah.
So now the confessional part is that the word was like enfleshed in Jesus.
Yeah.
But that to me seems to be kind of like step one if you're going to use the word, like the label Christian on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's never been a point in history where it wasn't batshit crazy to call a homeless dead Jew like the image of the invisible God.
The fulcrum of the universe, yeah. We claim that a first century Jew had something to do with the trajectory of the universe. That's insane.
Yes, it is. It is. So now I'm sitting here saying, so what you're telling me is that all Christian theology is insane.
Yeah, I'm saying it's a little bat crazy here. There's something. The only reason we justify it is the beauty of this thing. I mean, if we have to intellectually justify it, and I do think we have to justify it in and through the beauty of it. Look at what truth does, right? What truth actually does is calls us away from a common sense view of the world. So in a common sense view of the world, we say things like, hey, that's just your opinion, this is my opinion, and that's fine. And it is fine. But philosophy says, can't we have something a little bit more vigorous of a conversation than that? Can't we discuss with one another where the truth of values actually lie and how we might live a better life? That if, that serving the poor is somehow better than merely going out and shooting mountain lions all day long, right? I mean, I think I can make that definitive statement, but I'm talking as a philosopher now. So philosophy cuts through common sense, which is just as often common nonsense. But beauty does the same thing. Beauty, when we're stopped by a song, Counting Crows for you, Paul Simon for me oftentimes. Or when I go out behind my place and I take a hike up what I call Tick Mountain, when ticks are out in full this time of year, you take a look at the valley beneath you, and in certain moments you're drawn into it, right? And what it does is it breaks apart the way that you usually interpret the world. Namely, that's my house, that's the road that I take to get to work, that's the dog running up after me, right? So these functionalist interpretations of the world get broken apart, and you simply get to sit there and the world gets to be. It just gets to be apart from our machinations, right? So it breaks apart our common sense interpretation, our view of the world. And I think this happens. This is the functional relationship between truth and beauty. And what the ancient philosophers saw is that truth and beauty are two ways of talking about the same thing. Namely, God is the true, God is the beautiful. And when we're drawn into one or the other, we're talking about God either way.
Mm-hmm. So, well, did you pull up? Have you even looked at the chat line?
No, not at all. I'm absolutely inept at this kind of stuff.
Well, don't.
And I'm afraid I'll turn
ineptness is part of your beauty and charm. But, Dreas Sanchez. Well, we'll see if this is pronounced correctly, but it's DRE''AS. But let's just say that for a Southerner, I can't pronunciate all sorts of things. But he put, and this is clever, it's better than what I was going to follow up, Sensus Divinitatis, ?
Oh, touche.
Yeah.
I don't know. Can I go Calvin? I don't like Calvin.
Plantinga, he just said.
Plantinga. Yeah, same thing. Plantinga's trying to reestablish Calvinistic themes, right? Sensus Divinitatis. Can I put a question mark on that one? I don't know. That's a tough one. I've actually been
question mark's helpful. One, I think that analytical philosophy's contribution to Christian theology it's minimal, and mostly because analytical philosophy can't distinguish between the nature of truth held based on general revelation and special revelation, or natural revelation, special revelation, both of which are problematized in unique ways for postmodern people. And one of the ways that I find helpful in framing the anthropologically constitutive address of human beings, and I may frame it this way simply because Eric told me I was wrong our entire friendship while together, and I feel like he might have to agree with me.
Or I might have to agree with you now.
Conservative than me, is that human beings in the cross-cultural multiplicity of testimony towards similarly framed questions that metaphysical people ask but don't reach finality at, that mythic traditions address but don't ever get to conclusions, that human civilization asked around campfires from now until today, and even on the internet in Second Life in really awkward ways with avatars, is that human beings are constitutively the addressed species, that part of being human is to live in response to a question that in its deflationary and dwarfed state, is attributed simply to our finitude and our historical conditionedness. In an honest and robust state is at least in reference to a transcendent communal possibility that is not determined simply by our past. And this to me is a way like that historically, when you were in enlightenment thought, you had this Christianity is pure gift.
Yeah.
It's completely a secular invasion. I've been reading your dissertation. It's the gospel is just a rupturous arrival.
Yeah.
And so you don't need to be religion. Screw that. Spiritual. The gospel is not any of that, and it comes and then it gives you the ears, then it tells you the good news. The other side of it are people who are like, you've been made with a Christ-shaped hole
in your heart.
Part of being human is to figure out the ache. And
you might have, Trip, I might have to fold my hand here. You might have me. And Ray, you
feel like there's
be right. This has to be something like sensus divinitatis, right?
Well, I don't want to go to sensus divinitatis. That to me.
Okay, well, we'll leave that on the back burner for now.
Because here's why. Sensus divinitatis is a confessional statement towards a discourse that doesn't admit confessional language. It is missiologically problematic to tell a people in terms of discussion that here's what it is you're doing. I don't care what you begin. It could be talking to your spouse, your kids, your church, your friends. If the conversation begins with, I've heard you, so now let me tell you what you're really doing, then it's stupid. Jesus never showed up and said, hi, friends, you're all wrong. You don't know what you're doing, where you're coming from, or where you're going. But luckily, the Logos is here. Go check this shit. I'm going to tell you what's going on. Like it is.
You want to go Dave Chappelle right now, don't you?
No, but I'm just saying, sensus divinitatis assumes the conclusion of a plausible, tentable, but confessionally constitutive to your giving of oneself in faith conclusion that its verification will be when all things have been made new. So we don't need to have a hubris there along. But you can say, I think, that the attempt to situate all knowledge to diffusive and culturally bound horizons has failed.
Yeah.
And that human beings, in their finitude plus, and you can call it whatever you want.
Sure.
Laudenberg calls it not natural knowledge of God, but natural awareness, or some sense that there's a depth dimension, a more. I mean, you could go across it in Eastern and Western religions. But
transcendence without getting rid of immanence.
Yes. That immanence at its best has a surplus. That's the minimalist definition. Deleuze agrees. So there's a virtual reality.
Yeah.
But why I say that is because sensus divinitatis has a coercive imperial missiology attached to it.
As if this is what you should have seen easily from the beginning.
Right. In the humility of God talk, I think is to say, to associate the more, the surplus, the logos, the drive of beauty and possibility in existence with a homeless dead Jew, you never get to that conclusion by necessity.
No.
Because necessity is a rational conclusion. And the only logic that makes the cross beautiful is weakness, it's foolishness, it's all the things that Jack Caputo wants to say, because he's really a Catholic and way too Christian for his own well-being.
That's right. I agree.
And so, I feel like this is a really important distinction where, radical theologians of the Catholic variety, process people, Moltmann and company that are socially suffering Trinitarians, Rahner Catholics whose mysticism is ontologically determinative and not experientially bound. Open theist if you're an evangelical. I mean, there's a whole host of theologians in schools of thought. But what I think they're wanting to insist is that humility and God talk are connected together, and they mutually inform. And then there's a space for those that the cross has made their talking point, their situation, that speaks to both sides.
Yeah, I think that's right. No, I do. And I ultimately, that's why I say, and you haven't read this point yet, right? At the end of the email, what true humility is not denying our talk about God unnecessarily and prior to any other event. It's really letting God deny it at the end of the day. So it's being humble enough to, one, follow the conclusions to where they lead, acknowledge that when we start speaking Christianly, we do it from the standpoint of beauty and the call of the gospel, and allow God in and through that to correct us, to call us to something greater than how we can currently talk about God.
Well, there's a philosopher, Eric. I call him Al.
You call him Al?
Yeah, or ANF if it's a hashtag. And he said that one of the problems of Western thought about God is that God's actually a bit oblivious when it comes to legal logic, the logic of power, or even the definition of being, and that truth is more determined by the beauty of investing in those you love.
Yeah, there's
I
something.
I almost thought, like, you inched yourself very close in your book, and I thought to myself, well, if that's Catholic, what's the problem?
Yeah, I'm not willing. See, I'm pretty with that, right? I think that's actually it's at least an existential definition of how we relate to truth. This is the Platonist in me still. I'm not willing to get rid of the intellectualist understanding either. It matters. That's part of who we are as well. We're drawn into this truth talk, whether we like it or not. It's just, in Heideggerian language, it's an existential of what it means to be human. Now, he'd reject me saying that, but he's also full of crap.
But he also wrote Principia Mathematica, so
yeah, that's it.
I really feel like
he was right on that one.
So you, in the possibility of being humble and God talk at the same time, you said we should admit that, for instance, that's a good deflationary postmodern insertion between
yeah,
commas.
That's right. It is.
Admit that, for instance. Or you could say perhaps.
Perhaps. Maybe.
God is love. But that love is something greater than which we can conceive, always giving God the last say in terms of who God is. This seems like an amalgamation.
No. Maybe.
It seems like Anselm and Caputo had a baby.
Yep.
Something greater than which nothing can be conceived. That's what fools say in their heart but don't understand.
That's true.
Then this whole last, always giving God the last say in terms of who God is, when God is who we know not what. Perhaps.
That's the issue, right?
Maybe.
As a Christian, I'm actually saying God is love. I'm also admitting fully with Anselm that I don't have a full understanding of what this incomprehensible notion of love is, that I will turn it somehow into a political move, that the disease of my will and the incapacity of my mind will make me act on it. So even Augustine, in this beautiful sermon that he writes, where he says, love God and do what you will, he talks about how slaves should learn to be beaten by their master as well, because they beat them out of love, right? And so he turns this beautiful statement about God into an atrocious statement about what slaves ought to do in regard to their masters. He doesn't get it, and he doesn't have that important postmodern humility point that says, with Anselm, God is always a greater love than which I can conceive, that I can reduce to my own way of loving, that I can sort of upend and create as my own. And what I'm really doing there, and this is the important point, I have to admit that I really mean something about the idea that God is love, leaving a space open for God to tell me what that love really is. because if God isn't love, I have no reason to trust or any reason to believe one way or another that God is going to tell me with any sort of trustworthiness what love is better than how I currently conceive it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important in all those respects.
Oh, no, I get it. So, well, one, oh, no, I have two questions. You could answer them both together and have the last word, because the other options are significant escalation, and I would much more joyfully enjoy your submission on human beings' anthropological religious nature, and I look forward to telling Dalford about it when we talk next week. So, but picking between your dissertation advisor and whatever Thomas endowed your chair, I guess a little easier to decide. So, one question that's you're going to answer first, and I'll tell it to you second.
Okay.
So you can do the other after. In your book, Homebrew Christianity Guide to God, that I'm rereading again as I mock you throughout it incessantly, is it comes up with, it gives models of God using characters.
Yes.
And
the most fun I've ever had writing theology.
Them at all. I don't want you to explain them or tell you who they refer to. I just want you to tell me the characters.
You got it.
And you're going to do that at the end. But first, you need to do this. And again, this is mostly related to issues I have reading one book, having recently read your dissertation.
Yep. Yeah.
I'd like to name this specifically. May or may not be related to chapters 2 through 4 of Jungel.
May not.
And arguments that I have written down in my notes in that Jungel seminar, where I was the only one that got an A on their final paper. But you finished your dissertation first, so anything is different.
Much closer. Yeah, that's right.
Jungel found humility and God talk something that had to be addressed by responding to Feuerbach.
Yeah.
And particularly Feuerbach's criticism of a critique of religion and the God is love conclusion and such. So the main thing I'd like to hear you talk about is how you understand Feuerbach's critique and how humility but constructive confessions about God are possible after it in some way other than some fideism or poetical alignments that omit the anthropological origin of religion.
Yeah. I mean, philosophical talk of God is easy, right? I see this one. I do love how Tripp says Feuerbach as well.
It's called North Cackalack.
That's right. The God of Philosophers is easy. I just think this is a result or a conclusion of reason, and I know that makes people mad. I think we have a bunch of cultural reasons for rejecting that claim. But Feuerbach's critique is real. I think it's got to be overstated somehow, because ultimately, we enter into this notion of God and the gospel is beauty. And by the way, let me just insert this really quickly. I make that distinction because when we jump into religion, we're talking now about the God of relation rather than merely the God of reason, right? We're saying what God is to us and what God could possibly mean for us. And for me, unless there's someone like Christ, God, the philosopher's God, is cool intellectually, but means nothing else. And I can go on with my life without it, right? But with Christ,
you actually love the God of the philosophers.
I do.
I know,
I admit that, but I think that's for very few people. I don't think many people do. Many people look at it and go, "Dude, that's stupid. Who cares?" And I
remember you straight-faced explaining the God of the philosophers while describing listening to jazz music, and your complete indignance of anyone. How would you deny the world of forms when you listen to Coltrane?
Yeah, I did not. Did I really?
Basically, it was stuff like
No,
that.
come on. Because it's never about the world of forms per se for me. It's about the
You know what I mean?
intelligibility.
It's a joke.
It's about intelligibility, man.
I know, but I remember one of the lines, and I don't know if you said this, but when trying to describe postmodern types who are Platonists, it say stuff like the sacred hum of the world and stuff like that.
See, I took it from Kurt Vonnegut, or at least I think it's Kurt Vonnegut. It might just be an internet quote. He has this cool either or, I don't know. It's at least a cool quote either way. That the only thing that I needed to believe in God was music, right? That's Kurt Vonnegut's quote. I think that was a reflection on that. That's right. All I needed was White Stripe.
Well. If only Marcelo was here.
Oh, dude, he really did like White Stripe.
Go ahead. You're talking about Feuerbach.
What was that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's just a question of whether the beauty calls us to a world that we couldn't make up or not. I don't know. I mean, maybe we can make up a world where we look out and we say, yeah, maybe the cougar in the Kingdom Come doesn't eat the bunny, right? That might sound insane, but it seems to be an implication of the total critique of cosmological and human violence that's at the center of the gospel. I'm going somewhere new with this. You like that? That seems to me to be the Hebrew creation story's critique of the Babylonian creation story, right? Maybe we can make that up. Maybe it is just wishful thinking. Maybe it's a bad LSD trip. Maybe Feuerbach's right. But I think the beauty of it, if we take beauty seriously as something more than taste and as somehow united to the divine, namely as the very light and draw of the divine that allows us to see anything and everything whatsoever, then we can take this at least with a modicum of intellectual seriousness before we hide behind some sort of shield, the shield of righteousness, saying, yeah, I probably can't convince you any more than that.
Well, you can convince them, Eric, because they can currently pre-order your book, The Home
That's true.
Guide to God, and in it, there's a multiplicity of models of God that include characters like
Mr. Miyagi, Jersey Shore, the retired Oprah, my favorite, your hippie aunt, and Joan of Arc.
Well, there you go. I mean, why would you want to talk about Sensus Divinitatis when Joan of Arc and Jersey Shore might snuggle up with Mr. Miyagi and your hippie aunt? You know what I'm saying?
Forming a giant cosmic drum circle. There's a lot of talk of cosmic drum circles in this book.
Well, you know, if you were born in Seattle and spent some time in Los Angeles,
take the person out of
Montana,
Seattle.
On that list of stuff you miss from West Coast, you're like, I miss drum circles?
The weekly after school drum circle. I deeply miss that.
You miss a half-pound vegan patties that can be grilled?
Oh, absolutely. I miss Birkenstocks. Besocked Birkenstocks.
You don't miss neighbors with chickens.
No, not at all, because we have them.
But your neighbors with chickens shower every day, shave, and wear deodorant.
That's not entirely true, I don't think.
Oh, well. No one would believe you if you said otherwise.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And if you live in Seattle, what percentage of the cups of coffee served in Montana should count?
Oh man, yeah, there's a lot of farmers' coffee around here. I'll be honest. You'd have to drink about 5 cups of coffee. What you want to do is you want to take the coffee, the farmer's coffee. You want to actually put it in the sun. Let that cup. Let the dude. I'm drawing a blank here. What you want to let it go down and then add more coffee and keep adding coffee until you have 5 cups in that one single cup of coffee. That is when you have maybe a crappy version of Seattle coffee. But I'll be honest, that's the only thing that Seattle's got on Montana. That and maybe better drivers, which is saying something.
There's just more space for drivers in Montana, so.
And they go about 2 miles per hour. I lived in LA 7 years of my life. I need a little speed on the roadway.
Well, I thank you for hanging out. I'm looking forward to your book coming out so that others can hate it as much as me and the wrong people appreciate it. Then I will have an army of prayer warriors who know not who that is they pray to, that may or may not want a non-existent yet insistent transcendent deity to possibly lure you, though non-teleologically or axiologically committed towards a position more like mine. But not because I require sameness, but because there's no better different than the different person across from you completely agreeing with you without agreeing completely to it, and other things like that.
And other things like that. Dear Lord, that was good. That was good. I appreciate that.
Well, I hope so. And until next time, remember, if you haven't asked Jesus in your heart, Ric Flair is always available.
Can you bring us out of here with a Ric Flair woo?
Oh no! I feel like at this point, you get to. You have a kid sleeping.
In my humility, I defer the wooing to the master of wooing.
All right. Woo! All right.
Amen.
There you go.
Amen.
Eric,
good to talk to you.
I just want you to know that